From New Jersey, this is Low Fidelity. I'm Jeff Heller.
And I'm Mike Labrie. On this episode, we will be discussing the evolving methods of music discovery.
You can support Low Fidelity by reviewing us on iTunes, subscribing to us on our Reddit and YouTube channels, and by following Lo-Fi Podcast on Twitter.
All the links you need are in the description of this episode. You are always welcome to share any feedback in the comments or send us an old-fashioned email to feedback@lowfidelity.info.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, same to you. Sorry.
It's okay. It's not a problem. It is currently January 3rd as we're recording this, so a little bit later than we usually do. But Mike, you sound perfectly wonderful.
We'll see how I get this episode. It's either Thanksgiving or Christmas. I will get sick on, guaranteed, every year. And this year was Christmas. It lasted through New Year's. Here I am. I live.
Well, you sound fine anyway, so don't worry about it. I've gotten through unscathed so far, thankfully. Fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Here, take that.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Great. With a new year now upon us, I figured this would be a really good time to discuss this kind of a topic. But before we get to the topic, I would just like to share that our web address, lowfidelity.info, is now live. There is a website that you can now visit, which works as kind of like an archive of our podcast. So nothing interactive really there, just a bunch of links. It's kind of like the same thing as Reddit, except it's our own domain name.
Yeah, you'll notice it looks similar to the subreddit and everything. It's just a great place to have as a catch-all for everything. People aren't familiar with Reddit, kind of get confused going there, don't know how to use a podcatcher. Do people even still say that anymore? I don't know. Great place to go. You can grab everything there.
Great. Then let's take it right into our topic, which is about music discovery. I think that with this being a new year, the reason why this seemed like an apt topic of discussion is because of the whole idea of this New Year's resolution, right? I did have this resolution once where I thought, let me expand my intake of music. Let me try and go into different genres and discover places that also advertise different kinds of music to me. Since I've had that experience before, I figured there might be some people out there who will have a similar experience. Why not talk about a topic which revolves around the idea of you as a listener opening up your senses to what is out there and seeing how commercial entities and artistic entities try to gain your attention with all of these different channels.
And I also think we're just, dare I say, the perfect age for this as we go into the later half of our 30s here. We have seen the rise of so many types of music discovery options, avenues. We've seen more compressed in our time than had been available previous to that. And there will be offshoots within offshoots. And so I think we're uniquely perfect to talk about this, dare I say?
Probably. I think we've had enough proliferation of digital sources and new media sources to check. And
plenty of analog ones before that,
exactly. We were there for the analog. We're going to organize this topic by looking at old methods first, then looking at newer methods, breaking down some examples of each of those things and whether they were effective or not effective.
Sure.
And there's this interesting thesis that I saw online that has a lot to do with how millennials discover music and has these sources and percentages, and there's a good sample size on it, which I think is going to be really the crux of this topic. Let's start with the old methods. At what point do we go back in history, right?
Yeah.
Proliferation of radio kind of coincides with the invention of vinyl presses. And so purchasing and owning music kind of happens after radio is established as well. So that's a really good starting point because at that point in time, you then were able to own the music that you were listening to. The earliest record that we have, which isn't really all that accurate, supposedly was on Christmas Eve in 1906. This Canadian scientist, his name was Reginald Fessenden, and he simply connected a microphone to a transmitter, which there you go, that's radio for you.
Yep.
And even though there's no historical record of this, it's really just legend, but that apparently he just played a song on this equipment and there you go, this music on the radio. Let's legitimize this a bit more than just like some guy in Canada putting music on a radio station. Now, radio transmissions in the early 20th century were left for enthusiasts. Have you ever used a ham radio or CB radio?
Yeah, when I was a kid.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was the kind of crowd that would be using just radio in general at the beginning of the 20th century. But it wasn't until around 1920 when there were no radio stations, just 2 years later, there would be about 600 of them when you see that bit of interest generating because the newspapers were really talking about the emergence of this technology. Mm-hmm. So people started to get into it, and the city, urban areas where there was access to this technology, of course, that'd be the place where you would see all of these different radio stations. The 1920s were a particularly eventful time for radio.
I'd say.
Yeah, because of the jazz from the speakeasies or the illegal nightclubs that would be playing on the amateur stations.
Right.
And that's going with the concert hall broadcasts. So you'd have this high-class classical music coming in at the same time as the dirty jazz, threatening society at that time because it was pro-segregation at that point.
Right, yeah.
Undermining all these organizations that are pro-segregation.
It's disruptive technology, the availability of the technology. It democratizes the voice of the people at the same time.
Yes, exactly. Especially because you have people people who are amateurs that are falling in the same standing as these commercial companies who have access to that technology.
What, 90 years later, we're going to see the exact same thing happen to what are we doing right now? Podcasts.
Yes, very much so. Right. So then, Mike, you tell me, going back into your early development years,
sure,
was radio an effective method of music discovery for you?
It really was for me. So I discovered music, I guess you'd say, probably around 8 years old. 1990 is when I really started learning about it, paying attention to it. My parents would have radio on. I think I talked about this. Music was never really a thing in my household. It was a very passive, very casual thing, but I really latched onto it. And then especially in 1991 and even more especially in 1992, I was just listening to whatever the top 40 station of the time was, but I also loved listening to Casey Kasem on the weekend as well.
Hello again and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem and this is our weekly countdown of the 40 best-selling songs in the USA.
And so you would get the commentary and the stories along with some of these songs as well, and you get to rehear them week after week and watch them in a pre-TRL era as they moved up and down the charts. And of course, that was a carryover from everything that had come in the decades in the past, but that was a great time of music discovery for me. That's when I discovered R&B and New Jack Swing, and this was a sound completely unheard of to me in my growing up.
I think an important thing to take from that is how you were listening to different types of music. Was this on a multitude of different stations, or was this like one station that was doing different kinds of music?
Yeah, it was primarily just the one station, and if I wasn't on the spot, I would be able to tell you exactly what it was called at that time, but I can't picture what it is right now. But yeah, I thought it was very formative for me because it opened my ears to a world that I wasn't getting from anyone else in my life.
But it's important to mention that this station wasn't playing this one particular kind of music. It was actually doing a multitude of different things. You just happened to be there when the style was lumped in with whatever else the station had.
Yeah, that was what was popular at the time. You know, you had Naughty by Nature being played on the radio. That was new to me. Boyz II Men, of course, came along at the same time. So I was getting the tail end into that new era of what Motown Records was doing as they were transitioning as well. And I just loved what I was hearing.
When we talk about music discovery, just in the beginnings of it, because something about radio, about FM radio specifically here, where it can't be that specific because there's a limited number of stations.
Right.
It's not digitally being sent out like Sirius and XM, so you can't have like thousands of channels. You can only have whatever is in your area.
It has to be mass market, and that's what I was at the time. I was an uninformed preteen that didn't know anything, and so I would just catch something from this catch-all station, and I would tune into these little bits and pieces that they would play along the way.
A good hypothesis from that, I would think, is that when you have that early experience with radio stations that are playing this wide array, you could still pick out like a particular sound and latch with that going into teenage years.
Yeah, but my mind was still so open at that time. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what did exist or didn't exist. So it was all new and exciting to me.
Classic rock stations actually did a great service for a lot of growing teenagers, honestly.
I agree.
Sort of like music education in a way.
Yeah, I had a lot of friends in middle school even. That's how they discovered things like the Beatles. And, you know, at that age, you're going, why are you listening to that? That's from your parents' time. But you had those kids, and you would be one of those kids. It was like, yeah, however, this is still good. You don't even need the word still in there.
Right.
I want to ask you about that transition in radio stations, though. As you were growing, were you starting to choose what you were listening to on the radio? Were you the one changing those stations?
Well, it's just like with music itself, where the technology influences the kind of music that would get produced. In the same way, a person's own home technology influences what they then listen to.
Yeah.
As a great example to that, listening to music in the car was not a democratic procedure. Right. This was, just a dictatorship. Whatever the driver was wanting to listen to, that's what everybody else would listen to. And I had my own radio alarm because I had to wake myself up to go to high school, for example. I would play it at the lowest volume because my sister had like supersonic hearing. But that's where I was able to build my own taste. I would just turn the dial to find something that I'd like. Hence why classic rock would become a big thing. This station Z100 would do these Saturday night dance parties, which would be my introduction to electronic dance music, which is still a very heavy part of what I listen to today. That would be how it influences myself. I mean, granted, when we get into like the iPod years of the early 2000s, then you get away from being forced to listen to whatever's out there and having to collect your own taste at that point. But what about yourself? Would you say the same thing happened for you?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I was listening to, the top 40, I mean, that started with my parents playing it casually passive, like I said, and just myself getting attached to it. But then I moved around a a lot when I was growing up. So I was picking up bits and pieces from all the different places I lived. So then in middle school, I started transitioning to the alternative radio stations. I'd be listening to that. And then it got to a point in high school, 1997, when I discovered email. It was like radio was gone at that point. I had enough recommendations and enough new discovering. The internet was about to hit my life in a big way as well at that point, that radio became irrelevant. Like, line in the sand, we have crossed it. It is over at that point.
Right. Well, we'll have to talk about community and suggestions.
Definitely.
Personal connections later on. So then let's transition over to film. Again, not really going to go much into history here. When we get into the age of being able to take music home with you and to own a piece of music, right, with vinyl out there, that is where soundtracks and scores being commercially released is a way that someone who goes to see a movie hears something that they enjoy in that movie and then wants to listen to that again. They aren't forced to go see the movie again.
Right. And there's so many different elements here. You have the main title theme to a movie. If it's a musical, obviously you have all those songs as well. You may have recurring motifs throughout a movie, very important for some of the things you have listed here. Or you may just have the hallmark song within a movie, or in the case of another one we're going to talk about here, like 5 singles from a movie as well.
Yeah, very true. Well, let's get to some examples then. The first one that I have, and I think probably the 1970s is a pretty good starting point for this. I'll give you a great example, Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
Where, wasn't that an album where I think 5-6 of those songs made it to the charts?
Especially when you have a movie that's really about music.
Yes, right. Although arguable that the movie actually had any redeeming quality, and it was really the soundtrack that people went to go see. That is a good seller of a soundtrack right there. And in addition to that, Star Wars is another big soundtrack. I mean, it doesn't sound like when you have something like Saturday Night Fever, which is obviously pop music and a compilation of sorts, although mostly songs done by the Bee Gees. So, you could think of it as a Bee Gees album in addition to a film soundtrack. But when you look at Star Wars, we're talking about film score being an album, but that would get nominated for Grammys, American Music Awards. I mean, that got so much heavy play as well, even though that was just a score and not necessarily something that traditionally fits in pop music radio. A very good example of another type of soundtrack that would be very popular as an album. Kind of fast forwarding a little bit, we look at The Bodyguard, which, Mike, did you know that this was one of the best-selling albums of all time in the U.S.?
Story. So when I was that was probably middle school, I'm going to guess, during our band concert, little Mike LeBrie played I Will Always Love You as a saxophone solo.
Really?
Yes.
By yourself?
By myself. Really just playing the vocal part. And it wasn't even the whole song. You only had like a minute and a half you could do. But yeah, so Jeff, I'm well aware that the Bodyguard soundtrack is one of the best-selling albums of all time.
Yeah. I never owned that soundtrack. In fact, honestly, I've never owned any of the soundtracks that I mentioned.
I definitely had the Bodyguard soundtrack.
Did you? Okay. Yeah. I guess then my question in regards to how effective film soundtracks or scores are, how influential movies have been in culture generally, and there's no way to really measure that, so I'm just putting it out there.
The other big piece of conversation there is as Disney acquires everything, we're turning into one monolith of everything into all one smoothed, evened out, total mass market thing. And it's the biggest levied argument against the Marvel Universe movies right now.
That's a fair point with 6 media companies. Yeah, that certainly is a part of it. That's a very good point.
So you want to talk about how effective movies were in selling soundtracks?
In that case, like in our case, yeah.
Landmark songs. Well, I want to give you a perfect example of when we would have been at probably the right age for things. Remember Wayne's World?
I think we'll go with a little Bohemian Rhapsody, gentlemen.
Good call.
I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango?
Remember how Bohemian Rhapsody came back after 17 years and entered the charts again?
Yeah, but yes, you're absolutely right. That was
So I think they
huge.
Can be effective when they're used in new and clever ways like that. You look at The Bodyguard. That was not just about the song. That was about who was in the movie as well. I mean, Whitney Houston was starring in the movie.
That's a good point.
So it was a multimedia event at that point.
And very easy to market too when you have an artist like that who is already popular, but then is taking the acting role and then has the song which just transcends, And
think about how many other people tried to do that over the years. Mariah Carey, that I absolutely adored, Someday, first big single. Yeah, Glitter was her movie.
But that seems more like a situation where they're making a movie just because the artist exists and is popular.
They're trying to force it. And I mean, I'm sure the same thing happened with The Bodyguard, but
I don't know about the movie so much as I do the music. Certainly the soundtrack is the big thing from that. But let's look at it this way. A Hard Day's Night with the Beatles, right?
Yep.
Where you kind of have, and it's not the first time that a popular artist had a movie basically about their life. Elvis Presley had maybe one or two, even though a lot of them were fictional and he was just like a singing person in those songs. But those were his movies.
Yep.
But when you get to A Hard Day's Night, I think that's where you see a shift towards the artist being the main focus, not so much in a music-oriented marketing tool, but rather just sort of an expose into the life of that artist. That's where, yes, the Beatles are popular. They decide to capitalize on that by releasing a movie, because then that kind of helps in a different medium spread the awareness of this group.
So we're talking about the effectiveness here, and we've talked about movies where someone's a star, where someone's got like a landmark song within it, or the scoring the entire thing. Ending themes to movies were always things as well. And I actually want to give you the example of when I feel from my experience that stopped. And that was Spider-Man 2 in 2004, where Dashboard Confessional had the ending theme, which was Vindicated at the time. And I remember that blowing up and Dashboard blowing up even more than he already had. And in my memory, that's the last movie ending theme I can think of that was like a major public consciousness kind of thing. That's not to say there weren't any more after that, but to me, in my mind, in my recollection, 2004 was like, I think movie ending themes are over around now.
Oh, interesting. So at that point, there was just nothing that you happened to see that really kind of made that lasting impact, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like song choice at the end.
Right. Written for the movie, really important. Yeah.
But segueing over to a different kind of soundtrack, which I think kind of has its own audience, but it tends to either revitalize interest in a certain time period or music of that time period, or just a different style of music. And that would be with movies like The Big Chill or Forrest Gump, where you had songs inspired by the time period.
Yeah, music from and inspired by the motion picture, but then also period pieces that select from that era to kind of reinforce their image.
My wife and I were actually discussing this a little bit today, and one of the soundtracks that she absolutely remembers, because it wasn't just that they had one, it was that they had a second for the movie and a third and a fourth and a fifth.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the film Hackers.
Oh, yeah. You just pick any song from that era and yeah, of course.
Yeah, like, because you have artists like Underworld, The Prodigy on there. There are all these techno tracks. Daft Punk, I think, was in there as well. But what was funny about that is, while the first one, yes, it's music coming from the film and actually being placed in the film, you had the sequel, quote unquote sequel to this soundtrack album.
Right.
But they would call it Hackers 2, Hackers 3, Hackers 4, etc.
Yeah.
Which I found hilarious, because you would look at that and think, oh, when did the sequel come out to the movie? And it's not to the movie. It's a sequel to the album.
It's like the album just came and beat the movie in terms of recognizability.
The album did so well, right? And so they had to just continue making more of these albums.
Fascinating.
Yeah, totally fascinating. So in terms of music discovery, I think films can be a bit ineffective here, because there are situations where songs that are played in film then are not included in the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
And I will give you an example of something recent, because I don't watch movies at all. So this would be like the most recent movie I've seen, and that's The Hunger Games. There was a scene in the movie where the timers go off and the weapon supply is in the middle of this field, and so all the participants are running to this truck, and they go and grab the weapons and start killing each other. And there's this song playing in the background. It's a composition by Steve Reich. It's called 3 Movements for Orchestra, and it's super tense, and the music is fading in and out with this high-pitched noise going on at the same time, which is sort of like trying to create this nauseous effect. And me being a fan of Steve Reich, I was thinking, that's amazing that one of my favorite composers is showing up in this film. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Not on the soundtrack, not in the score, because of course this is not done by the actual composer, it's done by Steve Reich. But the only time that he is credited for the music at this pivotal moment in the film is way at the end of the credits. If I wanted to listen to that song after the fact, unless I got this movie at home and replayed it and, maybe Shazammed it at that point, because there was Shazam at the time, there would be no way for me to then find that music after the fact.
Got it.
I feel like film can be effective as long as there's proper credit going on.
Yeah, if everything backs it up at the same time, for sure. I've definitely had examples like this, and I'm racking my brain trying to come up with it. I think it made me so angry that I purged it from my mind. But I've absolutely had that experience where that song is not on the soundtrack. How can I find this?
Especially when it looks like that the composer of the score is taking credit for it, because you get you see who composed the score, and yet here's this classical piece mixed in with other classical music, but it's not actually that of the composer. Yeah, that is where I think it gets a little ineffective. All right, moving on though. Another source you could say for music discovery is television, and I think that's obvious because MTV is a big part of it, but we're going to get to that. Let's first talk about just commercial jingles, because this is really the same with radio. You would have these commercials and you would have these little ditties that would be played as a way of advertising a product. Mm-hmm. We still have a lot of jingles that we can think of right off the bat. Just saying it to myself, I can think of Mr. Clean's
Mr. Clean gets tough on dirt and crime and grease in just a minute. Mr. Clean will clean your whole house and every room that's in it.
They're short, they're to the point. You can't buy that.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, that's such a good example of being short and sweet with your musical jingle.
Yeah, that's its own cottage industry. I'm sure it remains to this day. You have very talented people who try to come up with the catchiest jingle.
Yeah, right. And it kind of fades in and out of popularity, I feel like, where you'll have the moments where everybody has to produce a jingle. Certainly in the early days of television, that was a huge thing, right? Carrying over from radio. But you don't really see that all that much maybe nowadays. Like there's a few that do it, but it's more so just like, a logo is more important than the audio.
The hashtag is more important than anything, right?
Yeah, that's true too, right?
I'd argue it isn't.
I can't say that the commercial jingle really did more than just like an audio version of a logo for a brand, but I'd say a modern way of jingles, if you don't hear them that often, you hear commercial songs more. Channels nowadays, like Cartoon Network, they have Adult Swim. It's like a cultural epicenter, weirdly enough, on Cartoon Network, but they would play like this really out there stuff that just seemed to really gather a lot of interest. I think Adult Swim actually did a lot of benefit for artists if they got their music there, because they had some really cutting edge animation and some really good programming at the time. And so whoever would listen to the bumpers, I'm not even talking about like the music on the shows, I'm talking about the music and the bumpers between the shows.
Absolutely. And they would do, and this extends to Toonami as well, which later coalesced into something, but they would do their own kind of like music video style things. I mean, people of a younger generation really remember those Toonami musical sequences with Gundam and Dragon Ball that they cut together.
That's a good point. Yeah. That was in heavy rotation for a while. I remember that. So that's kind of to say that you don't have people writing a jingle for something at this point. You have a commercial song that's being used to advertise something. I mentioned this before in our Tutor or Not Tutor episode. Nick Drake's Pink Moon did a crazy amount of good for Volkswagen because they put him in a commercial. When you have a good song and it's done well to a visual, the song can actually get popular from that experience, to the point where I think it started happening in the late 90s, maybe more in the beginning of the century, where when you would watch a TV commercial, the name of the group and the song title would be in the commercial, like in tiny text on the bottom, at least until Shazam would basically render that useless. But I mean, that right there is sort of like the jingle as music discovery.
I mean, come on, the Apple commercials, they were pivotal in that movement.
Feist is an incredibly wonderful singer-songwriter, but damn, she would not have gotten popular at all if 1, 2, 3, 4 wasn't in that good iPod Nano commercial, right? Or Jerk It Out by Caesars. I mean, those are examples of songs that did extremely well because of their placement in Apple commercials, to the point where when you would watch an Apple commercial, you kind of got that recommendation almost the same way that you would get like a staff recommendation in a
that's
store.
definitely what that turned into, for sure.
Exactly. So that's kind of like a more modern method of how that works. And it's still effective to this day, pretty much, because Adult Swim's still doing it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a curated music suggestion.
Getting more so into the idea of watching TV for the purpose of discovering music. The jingle idea is a passive way of music discovery, whereas an active way of discovering music is with music-based programming. There are 3 shows that kind of do the same thing that I want to talk about. The most popular one in the US, I think, especially from our generation being the last generation to have heard of this, right? American Bandstand. If you have never heard of American Bandstand, I think some of our younger listeners will probably maybe have heard of it, but never actually seen an episode of it. The whole idea behind the show is really just a bunch of teens dancing to music in a studio. It happened to be music that was on the charts, and sometimes the artist would play in studio as well as maybe be interviewed by Dick Clark. Dick Clark was the host of that show for the longest. The show would also have segments such as Rate a Record, where you would have maybe 1 or 2 teens rating a record from this somewhat arbitrary scoring method of 35 to 98. I don't know where that came from.
I'm sure there's a science there somewhere.
I'm sure there is, but then no 100 and no 20. I don't get it. But they would ask these teens to rate the records.
Oh my God, Jeff. And at the time, the answers were already a meme. We didn't have YouTube yet, but it absolutely is now that people can independently make compilation videos.
Have you seen the compilation videos?
I don't need to, because this was my life. I remember them so clear as day.
Here's what Mike is talking about. Most of the time when you would watch these, here's what a person would say.
I felt it had a good beat also, and it was easy to dance to.
I thought it was really easy to dance to, and it had a good beat.
Yeah, seriously, look at this thing on YouTube, because there are so many of these that are hugely similar to that line. And it's so bad that they've made t-shirts with this phrase on it. So that is the proliferation of this particular phrase. But it's funny because over generations, yes, that is a constant from when it premiered in 1957 with Dick Clark all the way to when it got canceled in the 80s. It originally started in 1952, though, in Philly. It would become national on ABC in 1957, again, when Dick Clark comes in, and it would be this, massively popular music-based show. I mean, I wouldn't say that it had as much effect, I don't think, on culture at the time. I feel like it's certainly a product of the pop music culture in the U.S.
Yeah, it was just backing up and reflecting what was already going on. I don't know that it necessarily guided anything at that point.
Right.
Other than maybe fashion or that kind of stuff. You would get the added benefits of all the visuals at that point.
But we're also coming from the time point of us seeing it in the 80s where it was kind of already on the death knell. To our perspective, we didn't really see it where it was influencing anything where people were saying, oh, I got to be on American Bandstand, right? We're going to get into other shows that did have that effect. But American Bandstand, at least to our opinion, didn't really seem that way. It did eventually get canceled in 1989. That is the story of American Bandstand, at least. Certainly, that's a pretty big influence to us in the U.S. But I think even more so is Top of the Pops in the UK.
And I had heard about this too, despite it being across the pond. I knew what Top of the Pops was.
It was 1967, where it started on BBC One. Johnny Stewart, he was a producer for the BBC, started this program. Essentially, the way that Top of the Pops would work, you would have artists who appeared on the sales charts, either performing in studio, although it's always mimed. They're never actually performing the real music.
And that was consistent for many music programs, especially over there in that country. I don't remember what program it was, but Muse played, and the people on the show didn't actually know any of the members of Muse or what instruments they played. So all the Muse members switched instruments and just played the song. And it was fantastic. And it's a wonderful video if you know what you're looking at.
That's hilarious. Was it Top of the Pops they were playing on, do you know?
Don't
or something else?
think it was. Who knows? Well, I'll go back and find it. I'm sure I can find it somewhere.
We'll probably link it in the show
If we can
notes.
find it, we'll add it in the show notes.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So you would have these performances that were basically all mimed. If it wasn't that, then it would be promotional videos. This was pre-music video.
Right.
But this would be these short films that would advertise the music, essentially, that they would play that if the artist couldn't play in the studio. Now, also during the 1960s and mid-1970s, if you couldn't play live and you didn't have a pop promo or music video at the time, you would have this dance group called Pan's People that would dance to the song because you had to have some kind of visual.
Yeah.
But to an artist, that was probably the worst result that you could have because
that's going to speak for you. It's going to not necessarily be the representation you want to have, but you have no say in it.
Exactly. You have this lackadaisical choreographer who's taking your music and creating something from it.
Yeah.
And who knows if that's actually accurately reflecting the music itself at that point. I found that fascinating, by the way. And I saw some of these early dance montages with this group. It blew my mind that you would have this guy who's basically hired to come up with this choreography that these dancers would just randomly dance to when they had nothing else to show. I mean, at least get people dancing in the studio. That worked for American Bandstand, but
I don't know, man. Early TV days, it's all an experiment.
Yeah, pretty much, I guess.
I mean, it continued to be an experiment up through when MTV stopped playing music and experimented by not playing music. I don't know, man.
Yeah, fair enough. Stewart had interesting rules for what artists would appear on the show, and I just want to kind of go over some of those rules just because it's so consistent. I think that's what I'm really impressed by with Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
Is the fact that they had a rule set, they stuck to it. The miming thing, like how that's just with all the artists who rebelled against it, and there were many, like Muse, the Smiths would rebel against that rule, XTC would.
The Smiths, really? I don't believe you, Jeff.
Yeah, right. These rules, however, let's just go over them real quick. The program would always end with the number one record, whoever that was. Yeah, totally makes sense. Which was the only record that could appear in consecutive weeks. So if you were number one, you were always at the end of the show.
Got it.
Sounds fair. It would also include the highest new entry, and if it's not featured in the previous week,
got it.
It would also include the highest climber on the charts, and it would omit any song going down in the chart.
Oh, okay. So you went from 2 to 3. All right.
Yeah, you're right. You're not on the show. But if you're a repeat, you're not showing up either.
Yeah.
Like you have to be number one or you have to be new.
Okay.
I mean, that to me is a solid formula because I'm guaranteed to see something new there.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's good or not.
Right.
Tracks could be featured in consecutive weeks in different formats, however. For example, if a song was played over the chart countdown or the closing credits, then it was acceptable for the act to appear in the studio the following week. So depending on how they were played, how they were used in the program, that could then allow them to show up again later. That to me is just a really interesting way to do it. That may be a main contributor as to why in England or in the UK, if you were on Top of the Pops, you made it.
Yeah.
Like
if you could get around all those rules and still be successful, still get on the show, you nailed it.
Exactly right. A particular artist that I think sums that up pretty well is Brian May from Queen. We got a quote from him here. Mike, do you mind doing the honors?
It was filmed with the express purpose of giving it to Top of the Pops. For those of us who remember it, it wasn't a classy program. Top of the Pops didn't have a good reputation among musicians. Nobody liked it really. It always seemed like a bit of a travesty. If your music had any meaning, it seemed to trickle away when you were standing on a box in the studio with lots of kids around. But you could hardly knock it because it was the way that records were sold.
I think he makes a very good point there.
It's like a necessary evil. I see where
Exactly. A necessary evil. That's how I would describe it. You have artists who need to do something because they know they're going to go on top of the pops. This is what happened to Queen. In the case of Bohemian Rhapsody, I think the story is very interesting where they, first of all, the band had a hard time with the label in releasing it as a single. And of course they did. The song was what, like 6-7 minutes long?
Yeah.
Your average single's 3.5, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So of course the label's going to give them a hard time about putting this out. The band won eventually. And of course it climbed up the charts. So what was going to happen? Well, they were going to be invited to play on top of the pops. But it was a bit too complex of an arrangement in the song. If you haven't heard the song, please by all means listen to it now. But the song arrangement's a bit complex to reproduce live, especially when, you don't have like these, the kind of technology that we have nowadays that could reproduce it pretty easily. But even just miming it seems really odd when you don't have all of the extra instrumentation around it to really give it a fair treatment. So they can't play live. And if they don't provide a video, then they have to sacrifice it over to Pan's people to have them do their lackadaisical dance production, right? So what do? Well, in the case of Queen, they hire this director, Bruce Gowers, who, by the way, became a director for American Idol later on.
Oh.
But they did a 4-hour shoot. There was no storyboard, little rehearsal, and the goal was to get a video done before last call at the pub.
Love it.
So the band goes and they perform. They do this video, which is kind of like this mixture of dramatic lighting and visual effects, and there's some live footage mixed in there, but it's this kind of dramatic over-the-top production, right?
Yeah.
The video airs on top of the pops, and it's actually, funny enough, the first time the band would even see it because they had to basically produce this thing and get it to the show as quick as possible.
Yeah.
The video would basically help the single sell over 1 million copies. It would spend 9 weeks on the top of the charts, and it would help usher in the era of the music video. It's basically known as one of the first music videos where a dramatic element was actually introduced and not just a taped live performance.
Right.
So that is right there an example of how Top of the Pops would actually kind of shift not just the culture, but also the business model of music there by establishing what music video could be. Granted, though, it would cancel in 2006. It had a very good lifespan. Thankfully, though, the artists of today in the UK don't have to feel handicapped by it in order to be popular, though. Okay, so one last example of music-based programming. We're going to go back to the US for this, and it's Soul Train. I myself have never seen Soul Train.
I want to say that I actually saw Soul Train more than I saw American Bandstand, but my memories are really fuzzy.
And I got to tell you, though, that regardless of me not seeing it and you maybe seeing it, I feel like that had more of a contribution to culture than American Bandstand did,
Probably.
at least in the later part of the period, because what I really enjoyed about Soul Train, when I, again, not having seen an actual episode all the way through, but having seen clips of it and researching it, I found it to be really innovative with the idea of the Soul Train line dance. To me, that's what Soul Train is. It's that line dance where you've got people who are showing off the latest fashion and showing off the latest dance moves. And I feel like that had more influence than with American Bandstand, at least, because you have teens dancing around in a studio, but you're not really putting the emphasis on the dancing. You're really putting it more so on the music.
Yeah.
So with the dancers becoming the main part of the conversation here.
Yeah, you're tuning in for not just the music performances, but you're tuning in to see what moves they're going to bust out this week, what's everyone wearing, is more important than it was on Bandstand.
People would have favorite dancers on the show.
Yep, absolutely.
That to me is astonishing because it's past the music. It's actually like its own culture there for who is doing what and who's going to do the next crazy dance. Now, Soul Train was created in 1971, so this is the later of these shows by this guy, Don Cornelius. He was a sports and news writer at the time. They would focus on more urban types of music. You've got your R&B, soul, dance and pop, hip hop.
So you can see why I was attracted to the show.
Yes, certainly. So this was certainly in your wheelhouse, as you say. But it was canceled in 2006. It laid claim, however, to being the longest running, first run, nationally syndicated program in American television history.
Wow.
With over 1,100 episodes produced from the show's debut through the 2005-2006 season. And it would only be later surpassed by Entertainment Tonight.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome, though.
And I think when you've got a show that kind of centers around a kind of music that's got its own flair and its own charisma in certain places, like that is going to prove to be influential. And I feel like going back to music discovery here, if you are a fan of that kind of music, especially when you get into more specific genres, that becomes more potent, right? Where it's like you could take more from a show like that because
right.
You already have this interest, but now there's additional things to it. You're not just getting the music, but you're getting the dance moves, you're getting...
Yeah, they can really double down on everything they're doing as opposed to American Bandstand where everything's going to be smoothed out a little bit to reach as many people as possible.
Yes, exactly what I'm thinking. Or like in the case of Top of the Pops, right? Where they were effective, but it's because they they put pressure on the artist to get on the show to make it big. And so if you were on that show, you had made it. But when it comes to cultivating an environment or a culture, however, those more specific shows tend to do a better job of that, I would think.
Yeah.
Now, we cannot talk about television without discussing, probably in our minds, right, in our perspective, the biggest influence of music on TV, and that is MTV, of course.
Yeah, it was essentially there from birth for us, a little after birth, but in terms of being aware of the world, MTV was always there for us.
We were both born in 1982. This thing aired in 1983. I think the earliest examples of music videos on there, the most famous one would be the first music video they played, which was the Buggles video Killed the Radio Star.
Right.
My favorite way to open a channel that would eventually kill radio, but not really. I think legitimization was kind of tough for MTV. And we talked about this during our Thriller review, where there were racial issues with it, where they barely played anything besides white artists for especially the first year.
Right. And until you have MTV, I mean, think about what we were just talking about before, where music videos would be approximations of live performances. And yeah, that can work for certain bands, but then you start getting artists in there really experimenting with the format.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I think Michael Jackson's Thriller is such a landmark moment.
Of course.
Because it's taking what Bohemian Rhapsody established, which is let's do something dramatic, something story-based, but really going into the film side of things.
Yep, it's a short film.
And if you go back and listen to our Thriller review, you could basically hear us both agree that it's not so much the song on the album that interested us at all. It was the song in the music video.
Yeah.
I mean, that version of the song.
Yeah, we like that edit more than the album version for sure. I think many people do.
I agree with that. I think the edit's better, and I think that the visual accompaniment is just so addictive, right? Because you can't think of that song without thinking of the video nowadays. Mike, can you tell me, I'm going to ask you this trivia question here.
All right, shoot.
Can you tell me the first video on MTV that had spoken words not in the original music recording done by the actor?
Oh, God, I don't know, man. I don't know what era to even jump into here. Just tell me.
It's super early on, so Love is a Battlefield by Pat Benatar.
Oh, okay.
You leave this house now.
No one can tell us where we're wrong.
You can just forget about coming back.
Because it's like this father who's yelling at his daughter who's about to run away.
Talking about Michael Jackson, you see Michael Jackson do similar things later on too. Think about everything off of Dangerous at the time. Black or White would start out that way. Remember the Time had its own narrative surrounding the music video as well. I mean, that would definitely become a trope in music videos.
Something that Thriller did too, Mike, that we didn't talk about. And I think it's like a microscopic facet of that music video, but I think it's something that is interesting to bring out. The idea that there's audio happening over the song.
Oh yeah, sound effects.
Right. Because when they're dancing, you can hear the shoes scraping on the floor and like the movement of the clothing.
Right.
And that is on top of the original song audio.
Right.
Is that important to have those sound effects over the music in a music video? Do you need to have that? And you could argue that you don't need to have the sound effect of a person walking, but if you're treating the music video as its own film, then you kind of have to, because
I agree.
That's what you're doing in film. And so if you're going to treat it like film, you need to act like film. Let me go to some examples of music videos that stood out to me in terms of the MTV era. And I'll start with one of my earliest memories of a music video, and that is with Peter Gabriel's Big Time.
Oh, yeah. Peter Gabriel stuff is great.
And people are going to yell at me because they're like, what about Sledgehammer?
Yeah.
Yes, I love Sledgehammer too. Nothing wrong with that. I do feel, though, that Big Time warped my precious little mind when I was a youngin'. Because
you want to talk about warping minds. I mean, I was old enough, but all the Tool videos at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Sure. The surrealism that you would get in music video, because you had to take this long form of film and just shrink it down to this tiny, tiny capsule of a moment.
And what I love about it is, a good songwriter may be telling a story, but it's not going to be, as we were talking about with some of the John Prine songs, where it would be kind of like a very literal beginning to end story. And sometimes you would get songs that would get a little more metaphorical in them. So if you're going to tell a story in a song, but it's not going to be so obvious, beginning, middle, end, novel kind of thing, if the song's going to be a little surreal, the surrounding context has to, again, double down on that and really take advantage of and exploit the format.
Michel Gondry is one of my absolute favorite music video directors. The one example that I think everybody's going to know from him is Fell in Love with a Girl by the White Stripes, which is basically this traditional, random, quick cut type of music video, but done entirely in Lego. And what a genius way to do that song, because you have the White Stripes, which at the time were so incredibly inventive inventive by minimizing their entire setup with just the drummer and just the guitarist.
Right.
And so here comes Michel Gondry, who hears in the song that there's this simplicity to the music and that it's just this kind of love story type of thing, but it's not taken very seriously. And so he's going to do that in the video where he's
have
going to
fun.
Exactly. He's going to have fun with it, but doing the entire thing in Lego is just stripping down the visual to match the stripping down of the audio.
Yeah.
He is a genius. Another example of something he's done that I absolutely love, the song Star Guitar by the Chemical Brothers, where it's this one shot, and this is in the early days of doing CG and like some computer graphics and music videos here. It's this one shot of a person sitting on a train, and you've got the scenery passing by. But as the scenery passes, you notice that it starts to sync up with the elements in the music.
Oh.
This is the Chemical Brothers, so they're doing sequencing in their electronic music.
Yep,
and so anytime the beat hits, here comes a tree, and it would just be tree, like rail.
That's really cool.
Really cool. And to the point where when you would hear a vocal melody go off, you would see people show up with different colored shirts, and whatever color they wore was the note the person was singing.
Holy cow.
Like that, just down to that detail. If you look up the music videos of Michel Gondry, trust me, you're going to have a very entertaining time with this. Having said that, is this an effective method of music discovery?
I'm going to say yeah.
Okay, why do you think so?
Because you're reinforcing, if it's the right kind of video that reinforces song style, you get more stuck in your head of just the song. You have this association in your head. You do have to worry about the visuals overtaking the audio at the same time, though.
So that's where I'm worried about it, because as much as I loved that song by the White Stripes, I never bought a White Stripes album. So I loved the song because of its video.
Yeah.
But that didn't make me leap into more of that artist's
actually
work.
Purchasing discovery.
Exactly.
All right.
Some of my favorite music videos would be by artists that I just never went further with. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. The idea that you have this engaging video, to my mind, in the case of Thriller especially, you then can't think of the song without the visual component, which then means, can you really listen to the song?
Well, we have so many instances of that in our everyday lives, though. I mean, sometimes if you hear a song in an important life event, you can't disconnect that song from that life event, whether it be a wedding or...
A couple says this is our song, right? Whenever they hear it, they got to go and dance to it. Yeah.
You can think of so many negative things in life, too, where someone passes and that's the next song you hear.
Oh, like Johnny Cash's Hurt, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever I hear that song, I can't not think of him passing away soon after that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely true.
You want to talk about that? Cover songs that did it replace the original in your mind? Is it tough to go back to the original? I have a really hard time going back to the original version of I Think We're Alone Now, because I'm so used to the Youth Ahead's pop punk cover of the song. I'm like, this is too slow. I cannot listen to this song anymore.
See, you went into the pop punk direction. I thought you were going to bring up Tiffany, and I'm like, wait, you were listening to Tiffany? No. I see the argument that it's not effective because sometimes the visuals can overdo it. Some of my favorite music video directors, it's not their fault. They're amazing visionaries. I think at some point the record industry got a hold of that idea that, these guys are producing these amazing videos. What is it doing for our sales, and what is it doing for gaining an appreciation for the artist?
Yeah.
Because if it's too good...
Yeah, if we do our job too well, then we've already replaced it, and it's ubiquitous everywhere, and no one ever has to buy it or pay attention to it. I can see that. I can see how it's kind of a crapshoot, but it's also, why wouldn't you do that?
It's not like music videos are gone now either. I'm sort of saying it like, well, no one does music videos anymore because no one sees the value.
I mean, they moved to YouTube, and we saw them re-legitimized by folks like Lady Gaga and Beyonce, who use them to their fullest potential.
Especially with the case of Beyonce, who did just recently Lemonade. And in the case of Lemonade, did it to stunning effect and was very successful with it. I think it premiered on Showtime, right? That's a major event right there. In this day and age where music video is not a requirement.
Can we talk about one last thing from MTV before we move on?
Of course we can.
120 minutes, because that was a little bit important to me as I was discovering alternative music and hadn't quite made the transition to emo yet, because emo hadn't gotten soft to the point that I was ready for it just yet. But having some of that hard rock, alternative, punk rock, I can almost guarantee you I saw Sunny Day Real Estate earlier than I got into them by way of 120 minutes.
I think their live debut was playing 7 on that show.
And I've since gone back and seen that, like, oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing performance too. Did a really good job on that show.
I think MTV at that time was also happy to experiment with their programming. And as we were talking about with Soul Train, when you focus in a little bit, you can really double down on what you're showing, how you're presenting it, and giving some commentary around it.
120 minutes, and Yo MTV Raps to that degree.
my
degree
God.
as well.
I told the OMTV rap story that I have the complete card collection. Another thing where I know far too many of those early forgotten rap artists. Not early, but you know what I mean.
Right. Like the artists that, sure, they had maybe their one hit or not even a hit. They just put it out there.
They showed up that one day. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's move on, Mike. Now, we're not going to talk about a medium necessarily, but more so a commercial medium, if you will. Going to a record store.
Yeah.
We're
ever lucky.
Are we?
Yeah, because we have Princeton.
Well, right. We have the Princeton Record Exchange nearby. Probably one of the best record stores in the universe. I'll put it out there, the universe. I think they're terrific. I've gotten so much vinyl from that place at this point. It's ridiculous.
I've replaced so much of my lost 90s collection.
The thing is, though, that as great as they are, when I go to the Record Exchange, I have my...
You're on a mission.
Well, you know, I'm like this organized. I have my list on my phone. Like, these are the albums that I need to get. And so I go there with a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly, like, there's no intake of anything.
Sure.
But is it effective, though? I mean, like, if you walk up to a pylon, I always argue that a pylon is one of the worst ways to get attention. But I contradict myself because I can imagine one or two where I saw the album and it clicked right away that I need to get that.
Yeah, but it may not work in music for you, but has it worked in something else in your life where it's been, oh, I'm a casual fan of this. Oh, I didn't know this was out and I got visibility for it there.
That's exactly what it is, where it's like, I love this artist. I had no idea that they were going to put this thing out. Yeah. And when I follow like 20,000 artists, I'm not going to look at all of their blogs.
Yeah, you're going to miss something.
Exactly. Right. Like I'm not following all their Snapchats or their Instagram or whatever and like seeing, oh, hey, they're recording. That means they're going to put something out. Like, no, it's generally a surprise when I see anything from someone who I followed. Apart from that, I just don't feel like there's not the same kind of draw that it must have been early on where you would go for the sake of looking at the album cover and the album cover would drive you towards buying it rather than hearing it somewhere first. And I feel like that probably more so had examples in the 70s and the 60s, certainly the 70s, where you may not have heard the song on the radio, but it had this really cool cover. That's going to generate the interest for an artist right there. Instantly, Dark Side of the Moon is coming to my head like right away because how can you not think of the Prism, with the rainbow coming out?
I mean, that was my experience renting video games. It's like I've played everything. Oh, this cover looks cool. Let me try this one.
Yeah, rentals, I guess, would be a part of that too, right? If you could rent it, and the cover would probably make more sense. Like going to the library and seeing a book cover, right? I mean, same kind of idea. Some record stores were pretty inventive too, like the listening stations that would show up in the 2000s.
I definitely did some of that.
I definitely did too, although granted, I had to change out the CDs for those in my prior life. That was fun. But I discovered a lot of artists that way. Part of it was that if someone out there behind a desk is looking at this music and saying, this should go on our listening station, there's a reason why people should listen to this. If a person's the one behind it, I have more of a likelihood of listening to it.
Yeah, it's a very specific recommendation from a real live human being.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about personal connections later, especially when it gets to people that we know. But when it comes to a person that we don't know, right? Like the staff recommendations I bring up here as an example. Someone on staff says, you need to listen to this. This is a great album. I'm more inclined to listen to them on that one.
Yeah, because you like to think if someone's working at a music store, well, they're a fan of music. They have some kind of, if not authority, at least personal enjoyment, as opposed to Mike working at Blockbuster. I was not a movie buff. I worked at Blockbuster because it was a job and I got free video game rentals. Some people would ask me, oh, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? I don't know. I don't watch movies. What do you mean you don't watch movies? You would hope that at a music store, you're a music aficionado.
Right there, I think, is where some of that trust comes in. This person deals with music all the time. If they say something's great, I should gotta go and listen to that. Overhead music is a big part of the record store experience as well.
I have an example so recent that I have it perfectly remembered and planned out how to tell this story. I went to Princeton Record Exchange. I had a casual mission of replacing, this is what I've been doing over the years, is all the 90s CDs that I've lost through various moves or letting my sister borrow and never getting them back. Who knows where they went at times. I'll re-pick up some of my Mariah Carey and Janet Jackson. I'll just see what they have. So as I'm browsing around, I hear this incredibly loud song playing, completely not in my wheelhouse, as we would say, but something about it just completely grabbed me. And this is recent enough, this was 2016, that I can Shazam it. And luckily it wasn't so distorted that you couldn't tell what it was. So it comes back and it's Salvation by Destruction Unit. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. All right, I'm going to grab this when I get home. I'm not going to buy it at the store. I'm going to buy it digitally. You know how it goes, like when you're out at a big box store and you end up buying it on Amazon. That's just how it went. Then I later found out that it actually got heavy rotation and promotion on Adult Swim, but I hadn't had cable in 10 years at that point. So I completely missed whatever promotion they got. But that was actually an example of I just randomly heard this song playing in the record store and it prompted me to, look it up and go home and buy it.
Moving on. I think the most effective method of music discovery, let's put it right here in the middle of the episode. So
right.
if you're You're
This is the middle of the episode. I have no idea where we are right now.
I'm sure it's going to be, but we're going to put it right here. The most effective method, I think anyway, of music discovery is word of mouth.
Definitely.
Family, friends, someone you know, you discuss music with them on a regular basis. What is it about that person in close proximity that you know you have a relationship with?
It's trust, and it's trust beyond just music. It's trust on all these other levels, like ideological. You know, they're not going to recommend something to you that's completely against all of your political agendas of the day.
Could you also say that it's because of what they say about the artist, in addition to them just saying, hey, I listened to this group, it's really good?
Yeah, as you hope if it's someone that close, you're going to have a good rapport with them. You're going to have a larger conversation than it has a good beat and I can dance to it.
I think a little bit too is you're able to give that person a direct piece of feedback
Definitely.
on how they did, right?
Yep.
If they're going to recommend something to me and I go, oh yeah, it was okay, it was good. And they're like, okay, well, if that wasn't great, try this,
Yeah,
right?
you can have a back and forth over it.
Do you have anybody like that in your life, Mike?
I think his screen, it was definitely Maverick something. I want to say it was Maverick 763. Can't entirely remember. He sent me an early MP3 of Newfound Glory, back when they were still a Newfound Glory, and back when the songs on Nothing Gold Can Stay still had the movie quotes in them. This was 1999. Newfound Glory was a band that defined me for like 4 or 5 years after that point. He lived in Florida. Newfound Glory is from Florida, and they were just starting to blow up. Just happened to send me a song. And that was a wonderful, we're talking about the internet here now, but that was just a perfect example of we had a rapport from something else that extended then to music as we learned more about each other at the time. That was a wonderful recommendation because, all right, I'm into this style of music. Oh, me too. Here's something from my area. It's like I can tell you about New Jersey bands, tell me about your Florida bands.
I think a personality quirk has to come into play here, where I think it also kind of depends on what type of personality you are. When I got to tell you, I am rather selfish when it comes to this. If someone comes up to me and says that I know and, you know, I'm very friendly with, and they say, you should listen to this, my first instinct is not to listen to it. It's honestly like where I go the serendipitous route more than with the personal route. And though, has that changed over time? In my case, I could say not really to that question, though I can certainly disprove it in cases because I have an older sister. We've mentioned this before on the show, having an older sibling, that person to a younger sibling, I mean, that is who educates you on culture, because that is your closest being of yourself there, basically. And they're going through life faster than or earlier than you are. So whatever they recommend to you, you're going to put a certain amount of seriousness to it, which could certainly explain why my sister got me into bands like Fish, The Bad Plus, Pink Floyd, Soul Coughing, Frank Zappa, even A Tribe Called Quest and Notorious B.I.G. I mean, like, I would never consider listening to these, but because she went the route of exploring and listening to different things, I mean, she was going headfirst into all that and then would filter it out for me so that I didn't have to go through all of that eardrum blasting stuff.
And so what happened? Did you get older and you thought you knew it all?
I feel like she gets a pass because, first of all, I knew her the earliest.
She's grandfathered into the suggestion arena.
Kind of is, right? As I got older, we wouldn't be talking so much about music, especially once I got out of college. The suggestions would happen less, but they weren't less effective. And Animal Collective, I think, is the best example of that because this is when Fish went on a hiatus. I think this was around 2004. At the time, people were really bummed. So what do? Well, you look for other artists that could kind of stoke the same fire. What would appear commonly in some of these forums that people would frequent about Fish, they would say Animal Collective. And so that then led to my sister recommending them to me because she's saying, look, if you're really missing them, these people are saying, check out this band.
Got it.
They're following in a similar fashion. Animal Collective is like hardly close to what Fish is.
Right.
But it still took me a long time before I would actually go and listen to them on my own and truthfully enjoy it on my own.
This is very common, you know, when you get suggestions, and especially when you have something recommended to you too often or too enthusiastically, your kind of natural reaction is to be like, I don't know about that. Happened to us in the cartoon Avatar: The Last Airbender. It was so overhyped to us by so many people. It was really, I don't believe you. Like, this can't be true. And it eventually took us time away from that overeagerness to give it a fair shake.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is something I feel we could have easily overlooked, where it's like when something is too popular or too ingrained in the culture and you haven't gotten on the boat when you were supposed to.
Right. Yeah. It's tough. You kind of want to have that, oh no, I'm too good for it feeling at the same time.
Right. So that's family. What about friends?
Brad.
Totally. For all of you out there who are listening to this version of Low Fidelity, there have been 2 other versions of the show. In the first version, it was myself and Brad. As soon as he knew that you were a fan of music, the suggestions would come roaring out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And like you couldn't, like it was an assault.
You couldn't stop it, and they were always right.
Yes, they were always, his accuracy is crazy.
I can tell you the last most recent example that Brad totally nailed for me, this is somewhat recent in the grand scheme of things, was I was like, nah, I didn't really care for that Foster the People record. He's like, no, listen to it again. You're wrong. I'm like, all right, Brad said so. So I'm going, oh my good, you were right. Of course, Brad was right.
He was such an influencer because how much he knew of a particular scene and a particular culture, and having similar taste to him would benefit you in his suggestions. He could think of something from whatever you give him. Just so adept at that. When it comes to introducing you to a type of style that you're not already comfortable with, yeah, he had that tenacity to be like, no, you're wrong. Exactly what you said. Try again. And yeah, you'd just be right about it. I got to tell you, when we did the second version of Low Fidelity, where you started in,
yes,
I had 0.01% of an idea as to what emo, pop punk, that realm of music was all about, or what redeeming value there was in it. And we had discussed this, I think during the Saves the Day review back then, where I had heard about Saves the Day in high school because they were part of the local culture, basically, in my high school
from
days.
Princeton,
Exactly.
New Brunswick, basement shows,
But with my group of friends, they thought of Saves the Day as, come on, please, that band?
Right,
Seriously?
right.
No, Because that was the group that I was with, I never took to that music. And whatever they told me was bad about it, that's what I would immediately notice when I would go listen to it, and therefore I would just give it away.
Sure.
Fast forward years later, we do our show, and you introduced me to Saves the Day, of course, in a different context, and you gave me Texas Is the Reason. I would never consider those artists to be something that I would regularly listen to.
Right.
Now, I cannot tell you how much I love listening to Texas Is the Reason, and certain songs on that Saves the Day album, I still replay to this day. You know, when it's not family, and you're coming up to a genre that you're not comfortable with already.
Yeah, it's all right. I know this isn't what you're looking for. Let me get something that is either the closest approximation of, or I think has enough merit to it in this other realm that I think you'll still appreciate.
You're becoming a representative almost of that culture.
Yes.
So that you're saying, this is what will get you started into it.
Yes, Mike the Baron of New Brunswick basement show culture.
You did that very efficiently for me. Have you done that for other people? I'm curious.
Yeah, that was me with my extended family, not yet my family, but in college. I was so into music discovery. I was in all the IRC channels. I was getting, all the best ofs every month, that kind of thing. I was listening to enough new music in college up through about 2005 that I made a new mix CD every month of new music.
Whoa.
And my sister-in-law to this day still has some of my burned CDs. She's like, I don't know what any of the artists were on this. Can you go through and retag my music for me? I'm like, oh yeah, 2005. All right, let me go through that. My March 2005 mix CD, let me tell you, dude, that was the bangingest mix CD ever.
So then I think a great way to summarize this then, in terms of, with family, it's the fact that you're so close to them. There's that trust, that constant communication. You're going to transfer that culture back and forth in some way.
Yep.
But when it comes to friends where the connection may not be as close, that still works enough. You still have that friendly rapport with someone where you allow that kind of suggestion to come to you and influence your own tastes. This is now going to transition us over to new and current methods of music discovery. The way that I want to start off this section of our episode is with a white paper called Millennial Music Discovery. This was written by Libby Corbell. She is MBA, Kellogg School of Management and Northwestern University. This paper was published in 2016. She interviewed online 1,500 people, and there were 16 in-depth interviews with millennials of ages 18 to 34 from the Chicago area in February of that year. So that's a decent sample size. And she basically just asked them, how did you discover music? She was able to come up with some conclusions based on all of the surveys she got back.
Okay.
Just a little side note that I think is really interesting about her. Soon after she published this, she would become the manager of strategy and operations at Pandora. She's since moved on from that role, but I mean, that's a pretty fitting job.
Seems like an appropriate fit, but yeah.
I would say so, yeah. You can discover this white paper online as well. I'll put the link in the show notes, obviously. Her goal with this white paper was to answer the question of what are the habits and behaviors behind the millennial journey to discover new music. Her perspective is that you are a record label or an artist. You have this product that you've made or this piece of art that you've made. You want people to hear it because that is what you do as an artist. So you need to go and sell yourself in whatever way you see fit. What are the best methods to do that? What is effective? And how do you market to the kinds of listeners that that are out there. I found this fascinating that she was able to, from all this data that she got, she was able to break down the millennial music listener to 3 different kinds, 3 different types. Now, these terms, by the way, are terms she came up with. Let's put it that way. There's the routinist. This is a listener who takes a passive role in discovering music. They spend little on music in general. They prefer free services such as FM radio, Pandora, and YouTube, and they spend little time engaging with the artist. Now you have your backstorians. That's another one. I would have chosen a different word, but okay, whatever. This is a person who's interested in learning about the artist, more likely to only like 1 or 2 genres, but she says they use the highest variety of sources to get information on their bands. So different social media platforms, different websites, different blogs, etc. The last category is songsmith. Listeners that are songsmiths explore the music itself, more likely to enjoy several genres. In fact, 20% like 7 or more. They're least reliant on recommendations from friends, most likely to use lots of discovery sources though. 80% use 4+, 34% use 7+.
Wow.
Mike, maybe this is an astrology thing where you hear the behavior of an Aries and you go, yep, that's Aries. That's me. I'm an Aries and that's that. Maybe that's a bit of that going on here, but reading these descriptions, routinist, totally my wife.
Yeah.
Backstorian, that's you.
Yes, it is.
And songsmith, totally me.
Absolutely.
And I feel like in general, she's right. I want to discuss some of the results, but before we do, I want to answer the question of why is this important? Why is this information important in the first place? In 2016, Spotify had approximately 20 million songs. Of those 20 million songs, 4 million, that's about 20%, are unheard, 0 plays. It's so bad that there are free tools online. There's this one called Forgetify, where you can have the service randomly play one of those 0 play tracks on Spotify just so that they can get 1 play.
Wow.
Like that is their only purpose. That's a huge amount of pressure for an artist who makes music to enter this atmosphere where you could have 20% of an available library, millions of songs unheard. You could easily become one of those, especially with the proliferation of music creation software. There are artists that we're very familiar with that use GarageBand, the built-in app on the Mac to make music. Foster, the people you mentioned, they use Logic Studio. I mean, you could have someone make songs in their basement and get like millions of copies sold, or not really sold, but you could say millions of plays on streaming services at this point, because quality isn't so much the factor when proliferation or advertising or marketing online can be the way people get to listen to you. Another good example of that, the mixtape. In the realm of hip hop, if you have a mixtape and you put it out there, there are websites that just collect mixtapes and make them available. They're free because the artist is sacrificing that piece of work just for exposure's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, they're undermining the commercial aspect there by just putting themselves out and marketing themselves with what they do best, their music.
Well, what you're talking about there, again, is curation. And I think going back to some of the numbers here, you may hear the phrase decision paralysis. There's so much out there. I mean, we got to it with when we got cable. There's so many channels. I don't know what to watch. There's so many channels. There's nothing on. There's 20 million songs on Spotify. I don't know what to listen to. So I'm just going to type in the Get Up Kids again. So you need a service to tell you what to listen to, because otherwise you're just going to listen to the same old crap.
All right. Well, with that said, then let's talk about some results. Of the 1,500 millennials who responded to the survey, 64%, almost 2/3, discovered music based on recommendations from friends.
Yeah, of course.
That proves that connection is still potent. It still works. Great method of music discovery, aka go out there and make some friends. But Mike, this second result is what really fascinates me. 62% from FM radio.
Occasionally it does still go on. Yeah.
How? I mean, because I haven't listened to FM radio as in I want to listen to the radio instead of something else. Now, granted, maybe a slight asterisk, because have I listened to Pandora before? Yes. Have I listened to certain radio stations?
Yeah, radio equivalents.
Radio equivalents, right. Or Beats One, right, from Apple Music.
Yeah.
I've listened to Beats One plenty of times. Does that count as an FM station? I kind of would count Beats One in that case. So I guess, yes, I would actually fit into that FM radio thing because I have heard artists on Beats One that I would then investigate and listen to later. I'll give it the benefit on that one. But 62% in comparison to 64% that got recommendations from friends, that's really high. But I guess it comes down to FM radio being so indoctrinated with the technology of a car still.
Yeah.
Right.
And for us, when radio goes on is when a playlist ends or we're only going for a couple minutes somewhere and it's just put it on. I don't care what I listen to.
Maybe that's it too, where it's like, I don't have to do anything. I just turn it on and it's already there.
Yeah.
So going down the list, 45% for music videos. I think that's kind of accurate considering anyone in their low to mid 30s would certainly say music videos because they were there for when music videos were events and MTV was a big thing. We were there for the downfall when Real World came on and we know, all right, this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
Going down the line, 40% from internet radio, 37% from an artist's social media, 34% from movie soundtrack. But at the lower end of the spectrum, 14% from award shows, 11% from blogs, right? Like blogs are less influential than award shows. Weird to me. Music magazines get 8% and 3% from other sources. Those are the least effective methods. Now, let's talk about what happens after discovering a new song. 49% would watch a music video. So kind of leading to our earlier discussion where it's not that music videos went away. In fact, if there was a music video, people are more likely to look at that. Is that a carryover from the music video days and people missing it? Or is it, I need to know more about this artist?
Yeah.
Go see what they look like. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah.
44% would add that song to a playlist. 31% would look up the lyrics. We'll skip a few results here. Again, you could look up the white paper online. We'll put the link in the show notes. But let's look at the lower end of the options here. 6% go to the artist's website. I would completely agree. I have absolutely no need to relearn a user interface of a band's website.
Yeah.
6% follow the artist on Twitter. That's surprising. I would think that would be a lot more. But 4% look at their tour schedule. 4%.
That's very low, yeah.
That is astonishingly low, isn't it? At the same time, I feel like maybe this leads to a bigger question of, do people still go see shows?
Yeah, I mean, think about how many people listen to even a low popularity band. They're still popular. When I go to a show, I'm like, how are there not more people here for this show? I think a lot of people just don't think about that's the thing you can do or should do.
Maybe they don't know that it supports the artist more than buying their music, right? The most important part of all of this, though, is that a common need centered on convenience when it came to music discovery platforms and millennials.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I'm not going to go to the band's website. I already have Twitter open. I already have Facebook open. Like, be there. And even then, probably not going to go follow your band right away.
Right. So it has to be convenient because you can't spend that much time when there's so many other things that you might have to take care of. YouTube was used by 85% of all surveyed.
I mean, YouTube is the second most popular search engine in the world, owned by the number one most popular search engine in the world. That makes so much sense.
It makes so much sense. The convenience isn't so much in their interface as it is their search engine, right?
Yeah.
And how good their search engine is.
And you know everything is going to be there, legit or otherwise, to the point where we have this problem now with people of all age ranges, where they assume if it's on the internet, well, it must be legal and free, right? Well, not necessarily. Just because someone put it there doesn't mean it's supposed to be there.
Very true. So to that end, Pandora used by 61%, FM radio 51%. All right, let me get to my criticisms on this white paper. I argue with the fact that age doesn't seem to really appear much here when she describes a backstorian or a routinist. They all say 18 to 34.
That is such a huge range. You are a different person every 2 to 3 years at that point.
My wife absolutely agrees with this. She said, well, that can't be true. When I was 20, I had no money, but I had time. And I had culture and friends and all sorts of places where I can take in music.
Yeah, it's the cliche college student with infinite free time and no money to do anything with it.
Right. And then when you get older, you have the money, you just don't have any time.
Right.
So
it's the catch-22 of life.
It is a catch-22, exactly. So when you see some of these results that say, oh, they use this service or they do this thing, currently or historical, because, right, if you had talked to me 10 years prior, my results to this would be different than what it currently is, even if all the technology that is here today was there.
Yeah.
So I found this white paper to be fascinating. Good sample size, but really interesting conclusions to make from it. From there, let's talk about I would call this like the elephant in the room when it comes to the modern example of music discovery, and that is streaming services.
Yeah.
There are certainly examples that are still out to this day and will probably be here for a while. Spotify, of course, I would say the number one in terms of subscriber base. Apple Music, hot in its heels. Tidal, we'll see how long that lasts. But Pandora is still hanging in there after all this time, after you were saying, yeah, arguably the first one, basically. There are other services as well, but for a streaming service, I mean, those are the big players at the moment. If you want my take on how they fare, at least in terms of Spotify versus Apple Music, I actually wrote a blog post about this back in July 2015, comparing the two services, pros and cons, and what I felt would be a good fit for you. I had my issues with Spotify. I still do have those issues today. What I wrote in this blog post is rather relevant to today's world as well, even if Apple Music has already updated its interface and made a couple of changes that made it drastically different from what it was when it first came out. Having said that, though, I still, in my case, I think the big takeaway is that relevancy is king. The more relevant to my habits, the options for discovering music are, the more likely I am to keep using them.
Yeah.
So if you fit within my lifestyle, I am going to continue using you for this purpose. If it's, and like Libby said in her white paper, convenience, right? So it has to be convenient. And I do feel like in the case of Spotify, I was not a fan of their algorithm, but I was definitely a fan of their search because I got to an artist and an album within less than a second. Whereas with Apple Music, I had to make sure I wasn't looking at my own library. I had to make sure I wasn't looking at the iTunes store.
Yep.
I had to then make sure I was looking at the right artist. I then had to go find the album. And then once I got the album, I then had to find the play button. Whereas Spotify was, you type in the artist, there's their latest album, you hover over
Just
the
hit it,
artwork, hit the play button, done.
Yeah.
Super quick. And that's still the case to this day. However, I do feel that Apple Music is better on their recommendation services. I feel like, now bias here because I have a library in iTunes that is, I think I'm at maybe 30,000, 40,000 songs at this point.
I remember you hit the limit at some point.
I hit the limit for iTunes Match, which was 25,000. Then they raised it, thankfully, to 100,000, I think now. Right. So I hit that limit. I had to get rid of all my Dance Dance Revolution soundtracks. But that's biased because it has that knowledge of my collection. Whereas with Spotify, it was going on my Last FM profile, which I had been running since 2004. And so it did have something to go with, but it wasn't like current stuff. There was like a period, like a couple of year gap there that it couldn't take that info. And so it only had so much to work with, but still it had enough. And I didn't feel it performed well. Of these services, which ones do you use? What have you trusted? What has been your experience with them?
None of them. I don't like any of them. I've never enjoyed the user experience, especially when they all start. They're all external apps. I'm not going to open up another program on my computer. I'm generally not interested in even opening up another browser window. I never use anything long enough for it to become an established part of my routine. And so then I'll try new things when I first hear about it. And I think that's my problem is I use everything too early when they're all still buggy and they don't have anything. And I'm just not willing to go back to anything. And I always just fall back on my own music collection. I'm not saying I don't use Spotify occasionally. If there's something out there and it's there, no, it's easy. I'll go click it. I'll play it. And, I'll get a couple ads every once in a while. But I have enough to listen to already that I already own that I don't need to go use it.
Well, then I guess I could speak to the question of, do I feel that these are effective methods of music discovery? You can do music discovery in other ways. You don't need these services. So no, this isn't really effective because you don't need to involve them in your music listening habits. For me, I do find them effective because 40 million songs with Apple Music, 30 million in the case of Spotify, that's a good amount.
Yeah.
That's a lot. So yeah, you're going to discover something because there's tons there. So the convenience comes when you're listening to something and it says, this person is just like this if you want to listen to more.
See, I don't care about any of that.
I do and I don't. With Spotify, I felt that anytime I went to go listen to something, it got the wrong impression from what I listened to. I'll give you an example.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'll give you one too, but you go first.
Great. Okay. I'm so glad I'm not alone here. Now, they've said they've improved their algorithm. I don't know what that means because when I go to listen to, let's say, Bonnie Raitt, who you could classify into two different categories.
Oh, yeah.
You've got her classic blues stuff, which is great and whatever. I'm not much of a blues listener. I'm not going to go listen to blues artists right away, but Bonnie Raitt does fit within that context. I get that. I, however, was listening to the album Nick of Time, which is a pop album.
Yeah, just adult contemporary pop. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. I grew up with it. I felt like, hey, let me go back to this. Maybe there's something unique about it. I go and listen to the album. As soon as I finish doing that, all the suggestions I get are these traditional blues people, which I'm not interested in. And it's not the type of music I was listening to.
Yep.
I mean, you could put her in that category, but you could put her in other categories. The fact that it couldn't make the designation that she may be this, but this album is that, that was bad. Like that had major mismarkings. And that's one example, yes, but I could pinpoint to different examples as well. The point is that doing tagging, you have to be very good about how you tag and contextualizing against someone's library as well. You have to factor all that in. And again, they may have improved this since 2015, but that did not leave a good taste in my mouth at that time.
The example for me is when I would use Pandora back then, be like, all right, enter in all the artists you like. And I would do that just because, and I can see where they're going with this, just because I typed in Catch 22, Real Big Fish, Less Than Jake. I don't want to listen to every bit of ska in existence. In fact, I don't actually really care about any other ska in existence. I only care about those three bands. And you can try as hard as you want to force more discovery on me. I'm resistant to it. I don't care.
Would you say that's because you're a backstorian and not a songsmith?
Yeah, maybe.
And that's what they're trying to cater to is the songsmith. I think Libby's findings here, if they adapted that into the streaming services, that would greatly help their algorithm.
What kind of consumer you are. Yeah.
And just look at the size of the libraries. I mean, that's the whole point of your library.
I don't want to share that stuff with the programs either, though. My library library is my file system on my computer. It is not in iTunes. It's not anywhere else. I'll just say, Spotify, it's not you. It's me.
Yeah, and I'll say Spotify, it's you. But when it comes to a service being effective or ineffective, I think there is a moral quandary that you go through when it comes to, at least one that I go through when it comes to choosing a service.
I think the vast majority of people don't know and don't care.
So I'd like to bring this to your attention, people, because some interesting info for you, and some positives and some negatives for the services out there. So let's talk about the moral quandary in regards to Spotify first. I'm going to make sure to link this article in the show notes, but this person made a very interesting case with a friend of theirs who had music that got popular and put on a playlist. Not just any playlist, however. Spotify has a section for corporations that want to get involved with the platform. They do this by allowing the corporation to create a user for themselves on the platform. Say like Starbucks, they create a new user called Starbucks, and they are a user just like your average Joe is a user. First of all, if you're not keen to the thinking of corporations as people, this is horrifying to you probably. So you're a corporation, you have a user on Spotify, that means you have access to this 30 million song library and you can create playlists. But because you're a brand, Spotify is very well aware of your existence, and therefore that can then lead to an advertising opportunity with that brand and the service, but without the artists getting involved. Because Spotify's very popular feature is its playlists, right? So if a brand is able to go on there as a user and they're just using it as any other user would and putting artists onto a playlist that they own, and then that playlist gets put on the main page of Spotify, the artists don't get notified that that's happened, first of all, and second, they don't get compensated. And so that means that a brand is able to take the song of an artist and attribute it to themselves without the artist having any say or any compensation for that.
I mean, we talked about that with our politics kind of tangent, where politicians would come out and use a song and the artist would be like, excuse me, that is in complete contrast with what the song is about, what I stand for.
Exactly. Now, granted, what does Apple do in this regard? Quick disclaimer here. I worked for Apple for 8 years, so I'm going to say good things about them because, I still think favorably of the company. I have a few things that I'm not happy with. Tim Cook, if you're out there, read my emails. But from what I know of the business of Apple, their products are sold at a premium price. We all know this. We know that they upsell like crazy. We know how much money they make off of every phone.
Right.
Just how much of a premium price is on there. They are a luxury brand. That's just what they do. The extra cash that they get, however, is fueled into services that they can offer for free or for cheap. Things like iCloud, which is free, and Apple Music, which is $10 a month. So these are all good services. The fact that you're paying that extra money for this product, for this piece of hardware, is going into the fact that you could have a neighborhood Apple store or iCloud for backing up your device for free if you stay within the space limitations. That's all good things. That is a healthy ecosystem. The only problem is that it forces you to further indoctrinate yourself into the ecosystem in order to get the full benefit and a return on investment. So if you're paying for a piece of hardware, but you're not using iCloud or you're not using their other services, you're not getting your money back. That is a downside to that. Apple Music is practically useless without paying for it. You have to give it some money in order to get your investment back.
And this is my conundrum. I don't want to get so indoctrinated and stuck in any one product or service.
Now, we've brought up Taylor Swift before in our conversations. I'm going to do it again when it comes to streaming services because she's had some news with them basically over the years. First of all, November 2014, she pulled her entire catalog off of Spotify amidst fears of the service not compensating artists fairly. A particular quote of hers at some point, I think, was something like, "I don't want to be part of just an experiment." Keep in mind, by the way, despite what you may think, she's an independent artist.
Crazy, right?
She's on her own label based in Nashville. I didn't know that. I thought she was like, Warner or...
Yeah, it would have to be, right?
No, her own artist. And she's that successful given that she's technically independent. Crazy. But she's able to make her own decisions. I mean, good for her, because in this case, she pulled all her music, and Spotify, the way that they responded to this was by making a blog post that just included some detailed corporate talking points. Here's direct quotes from it. "We love Taylor Swift, and our more than 40 million users love her even more. We pay nearly 70% of our revenue back to the music community, yada, yada, yada." These are all talking points. However, at the end of the blog post, they did a postscript, a PS. They parodied one of her own lyrics. I'll just read this to you. I don't know the song it came from, so I can't sing it, but the modified lyrics go, "Taylor, we were both young when we first saw you, but now there's more than 40 million of us who want you to stay, stay, stay. It's a love story, baby. Just say yes." I feel like that's an insult. Like if I'm the artist and you're the service and you're using my lyrics to try and get me back to... No.
Yeah, it's already super weird,
You don't touch my artwork. Like that, you don't put your hands on my crap. After that, they put 2 playlists on the blog post. Both of them created by Spotify. One of them, a Taylor-themed playlist with songs that had the word Taylor in it or "Come Back to Me."
Oh, wow. Wow.
Like just an absolute gratuitous grab. And then the second one was just like this heartbreak playlist. If I'm the artist and I see that, first of all, I feel partially insulted, but also like that's just smarmy.
Yeah, it's just transparent too.
I think it was right of her to stay off the service for as long as she has. And we'll get to how that went later on. Now, let's compare this to Apple. She had a similar situation with Apple Music a year later, June 2015. Apple at WWDC, they reveal Apple Music and they say 3-month trial for everybody to try it out because we're getting into the music streaming game. Now, what they didn't mention was that people who participated in the 3-month trial, if they played songs from any artist during that time period, those songs were not compensated.
Yeah, that was messed up.
That is hugely messed up. Granted, of course, it's a loss for Apple because these are non-paying members playing music.
Yeah, but that's for Apple to take on, not the artist.
Bingo. And so, of course, Taylor Swift wrote an open letter to Apple about this. She, and I'm going to quote her here, she said, "We don't ask you for free iPhones. Please don't ask us to provide you with our music for no compensation."
Yeah, for sure.
To Apple's credit, they quickly changed their policy with an apology, a move that highly contrasted Spotify's own reaction there.
Yep.
Here's what Swift said about this after the fact. "Apple treated me like I was a voice of a creative community that they actually cared about. And I found it really ironic that the multi-billion-dollar company reacted to criticism with humility and the startup with no cash flow reacted to criticism like a corporate machine."
Yeah, I mean, she's not wrong.
No, she's not wrong at all. I absolutely agree with her. Though it's interesting that last year, June 2017, her catalog returned.
Yeah.
So it's back on Spotify
Yeah,
now.
it happens.
Something happened. Let's put it that way. So she's back, but more bad news for Spotify, and this happened just yesterday. This is January of 2018. We're recording this. On January 2nd, Wixon Music Publishing files a lawsuit claiming $1.6 billion in unpaid royalties.
Oh, yep.
Not the first time that Spotify has been sued for this very issue, but it still begs the question of how are you getting your money when you have to pay these legal fees to the labels and the publishing who owns the music?
Yeah. You're battling against the very people who are providing you with the material you need.
Granted, Spotify has a really good free service, and Apple Music has a terrible free service. You can't do anything on it when it's free. But that's the point. I don't like how there is a lot of shady stuff going on, but at the same time, Mike, to your point, labels have been doing this too. Like the music industry as a whole has been shady.
Yeah, it's been eating itself alive for as long as it's existed, and there's a reckoning.
Yeah, there is. We'll see what happens in the coming months. All right, let's leave the streaming services alone for now. We've got other things to get to. Let's move on to blogs. They were apparently, according to Libby's white paper, not very effective. I kind of agree. At one point, they were effective for me. Looking at sort of like the music magazine side of things, where it's like, I trust this publication. They are specific to a kind of music. When we've said this before about television shows and to other things, when they focus on a particular type of music, they're very effective.
The one that I followed out throughout college, and I still keep, they've transitioned in my RSS reader. That was, I mean, this is maybe something we'll talk about, how they're effective or not, was always Absolute Punk. It's sad because it's the epitome of everything I hate, where it's like, here's a thing someone said, here's a video. Like, that's not journalism, that's not reporting, it's everything I hate in my other digital life. But it was convenient because I threw it in my RSS reader, rip Google Reader, now Feedly. I didn't go to the website for stuff. So it fit into my lifestyle of I was able to just get those quick hits.
But would you be there for the regular features, or would you do what I would do, which is whenever they put out a list, I would go and look at the list?
No, I was never really into lists, but I can give you a couple examples of when featured artists actually got my attention. One that they really heavily promoted was Jamison Parker. Parker now plays in Say Anything, but it was a band, a duo out of nowhere, and they really hyped him up ahead of, I think it was the first Skate and Surf, or was it Surf and Skate at the time? Paper, Rock, Scissors, that first song. And just because they kept talking about it, I'm like, let me check it out. And it was great. And the other was after Taking Back Sunday initially kind of disbanded when John and Sean left the band, John Nolan went on to form Stray Light Run. Stray Light got heavy feature on Absolute Punk. And that's where they released their first, I think it was 6 demos, was on Absolute Punk. I would have found Stray Light because I was already a fan of Taking Back Sunday at that point. And so like I naturally would have followed John to whatever he was doing. But it was the right promotion early enough that I felt like I was able to get in at the ground level, courtesy of this website. And to talk about some of the things why these sites weren't effective, you wrote here the ads and all the embedded stuff. The reason why this stuff worked for me is because I stripped all that out and put just the RSS feed into my reader.
Yeah, right. Not to mention the fact that when they do these ads that change size all the time, and so the text shifts on a regular basis.
I know, especially these days, yeah.
Listen to Libby on her white paper. Convenience, man. That is what it's all about. This is so inconvenient. Let's keep going. Video games, Mike.
I do want to talk about this because I think there are a couple key examples and transition points in video games. You think of video games, for the longest time we had, Koji Kondo's the score to Mario Brothers and Zelda, and everyone loved the iconic songs. And of course, there were licensed songs over the years. You would get a Star Wars game that would have the Star Wars music in it. But I think there was an exact point in 1999 when you had a couple games in particular. You had Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the PlayStation, eventually other consoles. When people think about Tony Hawk, they think about Goldfinger and Superman. Is the first thing that comes to mind. 1999, Crazy Taxi. What do you think about when you think about Crazy Taxi? Absolutely. A little bit of Bad Religion on the side there. I think that was the time when these licensed songs had already been appearing in games and other sports games in particular too. But it was those two games that had those like first levels, those first songs that just played on loop over and over and over that really grabbed people at the time. And I think the next turning point that opened it up to like a larger breadth of songs over a soundtrack, and kind of, as we were talking about before with the music video, where it was not just backing up the song, it turned into an art form, was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, where it was, here is the 80s incarnate, and it had the giant soundtrack to back it up.
And just to interrupt you there, the idea of music discovery with this is that you're already engaged because you're interacting with the game aspect.
Yeah. And then you have the developer curating the soundtrack for you at that point.
Right.
So it's just another natural extension of that. I think the next turning point was not just the game itself, but the promotion for the games. And the big one that people always point to, and I think it's a perfect example, is the Gears of War ad from, I think it was 2006, which used Gary Jules' Mad World to really highlight like, oh, this is an artsy kind of trailer. And from that point on, everyone else was doing that as well. But that's an example of that song already got new life by way of a cover, which already got new life from its previous use. What movie was that? It was Donnie Darko?
Yes.
Was it originally or previously used in there? And just like Queen getting a new lease on life from Wayne's World, here we have the games industry doing the exact same thing. Oh, I'm going to use this song in this context over here. And that completely ignores the music game side of things, which we could probably do an entire episode on itself. I mean, you think about Konami and their Brimani series in particular, but I do want to highlight Rock Band, independent of Guitar Hero, because I say that's where I rediscovered Rush. I was aware of Rush. I knew Rush. I sort of cared about Rush. But as I got to play the individual parts of those songs, that's what made me really appreciate Moving Pictures as a collective whole and just the craftsmanship that went into that.
I can't help but agree with you on this because, well, first of all, we played Rock Band together.
Yes.
many times. It comes down to the fact that you're interacting with the music itself.
Yeah.
So you are putting yourself almost in the shoes of the musician at that point and gaining an appreciation for just how difficult that song is. Let me tell you, I know I've said this before with some humility, that I wouldn't be into the Dead Kennedys if it wasn't for Rock Band, because I mean, it's so much fun to play Holiday in Cambodia and California Uber Alice. It's so much fun. And but you're seeing like just how difficult it is for them to play it, even though maybe not as hard to compose it, but
there's some really deceptive stuff in there. Like I always say, I can't believe how hard Basket Case is on Expert Drums. That sounds like such a simple song, but you go to play it like, oh my, whoa, never mind.
because you're forced into a position of appreciating it just to keep the level and move on. And so I guess having that closer connection to the artist in that case made it so that I would want to listen to the song after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, they really did that with Guitar Hero 2 in particular. The feedback to that first game, there were what they called the extra songs, the bonus songs that you could unlock, and especially Guitar Hero 2. And it was a lot of bands that wanted to be in the game because they loved the exposure that bands were getting. I think the Xbox 360 version of Guitar Hero 2 had even more songs over the base version. Another discovery tool.
From the perspective of video games, yes, I do believe the more interactive it gets, the more effective it is. You could say it's ineffective if it's a game like Crazy Taxi because maybe you don't like the songs, you just want to ride around a Crazy Taxi.
Right, yeah, there's two levels to it. There's that initial wave where it's the song leaves such an iconic impact from your gameplay experience, and then as we transition to the actual music interaction games, you gain that craftsmanship appreciation.
Yeah, very true. All right, moving on. There are two of the mostly current methods of music discovery would be what's happening online in regards to YouTubers and podcasts.
Make a prediction, Jeff. What is Mike's take on these?
I would say, well, podcasts, I would say very effective. YouTubers, I'd say not effective.
I do not watch YouTube. I do not listen to music podcasts.
You don't listen to music podcasts?
Nope, I have no interest in listening to music podcasts.
Oh,
I say
funny.
as a co-host of a music podcast, but maybe that's part of it.
I listen to music podcasts and I run a music
I
podcast.
guess,
So,
yeah.
but then again, I'm a songsmith, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, all right. It's not entirely true, but we'll get to podcasts. Let's start with YouTube, I guess.
All right, let's start with YouTube. Some examples of just some of the channels currently as of January 2018 that at least I think are pretty reputable. The Needle Drop is probably the biggest music reviewer on YouTube. How many followers does the Needle Drop have?
1.2.
Wow, as of January 2018, 1.2 million followers. A music reviewer has more than 1 million followers. That's what the new music criticism looks like. They are not going into literature territory here. They're not writing text. They are speaking to you through a camera, and they are giving you their impression of their take on someone's interpretation of culture. I mean, that I feel is where the effectiveness comes from. Dead End Hip Hop is another one that I follow. I absolutely love them. I don't even really listen to hip hop all that much, but I love this channel because the way that they interact with each other, that is the entertainment value.
Sure.
And it just so happens that if they say something positive that's something I can relate to, then I will go and listen to their albums that they suggest as well. There are other YouTubers as well who do music criticism. They have smaller audiences, but they do very well considering. It's just like with people like the Needle Drop, they can make it a career because they're getting that YouTube ad money. So again, it's effective because in terms of convenience, look, I'm already going to YouTube to listen to music, right? Because what's the percentage?
Sure.
In the 60s of millennials are going to YouTube to listen to music? No, I think it's higher than that, like 85%. If I'm already there, then here's someone reviewing the album I'm listening to. Oh, hey, why not? Let me go check it out. Wow, this guy's engaging. What else has he reviewed? And it goes on and on from there.
See, the format does not work for me, but again, maybe I'm in a unique position where I'm too busy doing my own creative endeavors. I'm not looking to sit and watch anything. I never have time to sit and watch anything. I may be interested in doing so, but
convenience as well.
Yeah, it doesn't fit my lifestyle. Sorry, y'all.
It doesn't fit yours. It fits mine perfectly.
That's your primary interest. Music is a primary interest for me, but it's like a B+ interest for me. I have too much other crap going on at the same time.
So then in contrast to how that's effective, they could be ineffective as well if you don't like their personalities, if you don't have time for them.
Yeah, of course. You can be delivering the best review, but if you don't like their voice, if you don't like their hair, I mean, it can be as lame as that, but it could very well be true.
Also, they sometimes don't realize the power they have. I'll give you a good example here. There's a band called Death Grips. They are, experimental industrial hip hop, I guess is a way to put it. They're crazy. The music is crazy. Had it not been for the Needle Drop giving one of their albums a perfect 10 out of 10 score, something he had never done on his channel previously, with the size of his audience, him giving that album a 10 out of 10 skyrocketed their fan base. I mean,
interesting.
The impact of his channel to their album, the band does owe a lot of thanks to him for the amount of press that he talks about them consistently throughout his videos over time. When topic-based shows, he'll talk about them. Is that an ineffective or effective thing? I don't know. I think it's too early to tell there. But in a case where an online music reviewer can have that much sway over the popularity of an artist, that's giving someone who's not in the industry or any industry that much sway over public opinion. Let's see how that goes as YouTube evolves over time.
I mean, we're seeing that with every other industry, video games, of course.
We're bringing the influence back to an individual rather than a corporation in that case.
Well, both. That's the problem, is that we're losing that intermediary and we have the corporation talking directly to their fans and also their mouthpieces talking directly to the fans and also the people that have no professional training talking to the fans.
Let's move to podcast, shall we? Because, well, two reasons. First of all, could you say that we're heading towards that? Look, if we were as popular as the Needle Drop, I would be thrilled. But I mean, that's like...
Jeff, you would have to do an episode more than once every 7 years.
Okay, fair. I think also, by the way, we should bring a podcast here because it is our last topic. And what a better way to reference our first topic of radio by talking about the evolution of radio going into podcasts, right? Because that's what it is.
Well, it's old and new again, just in a slightly different format.
You got it. Now, I have my favorite podcasts in terms of music ones. Mike, you said you didn't really listen to any.
I don't really. That's not entirely true because I talked about the Tooth and Nail podcast. I feel like the podcasts that I listen to that are music related tend to not stick around. So I think that's part of it. One of my favorites was Matt Pryor was doing a podcast, Matt from the Get Up Kids. It was inconsistent, and then it was consistent, and then it went away, and I miss it. But it was more about just like fun interviews with other band members and just really talking about day-to-day stuff. So it was like quasi-music related, but that was more about me being a fan of Matt Pryor rather than a general music podcast.
And he's not playing the role of like the needle drop where he's saying, hey, you like me, go listen to this, and that.
It would be, we toured with these guys and I think he's got some cool stories to tell, which is fine. And I love that kind of stuff.
Well, let me just share some of the podcasts that I listen to that have been effective. NPR's All Songs Considered. I will say it on a regular basis. This podcast has been so reliably good to me. Independent artists will commonly show up there because they're not beholden to a corporate interest, which I find really engaging because it means that what they suggest to me is coming from an actual opinion and not just someone's pocketbook. And I appreciate that, especially because it has the production value and it has the financial support of something that is corporate without being corporate. So I appreciate that take on things. I like that they don't shove things down my throat either. Sometimes their topic-based stuff can be a little heavy-handed, but when it comes to them playing a random assortment of new music, they are sometimes the most bang on when it comes to listening to new stuff and over a variety of things. I was brought to artists like Battles, Thundercat, and Shearwater. They are rather different in terms of their styles. One is, I would say, aggressive math rock. Another is funky bass and R&B. And another one is singer-songwriter and folk type music. Very different styles, all on the same show. But the one thing that they all have in common is that they are not something you would get necessarily on, let's say, FM radio or some more commercial methods.
120% your kind of show.
Yes, it is. The other podcast that I listen to very often is Sound Opinions. I love that they are these two guys who do music criticism for a living and were in the newspaper or magazine era. I appreciate their takes on things. I also really like their topics. They are engaging and entertaining themselves. They do have that production value. So I do feel that they can be kind of reliable. To me, that's effective because the entertainment value is in there, but I can get some really good music out of it. So why is it effective for me? I'll tell you why it's effective. It's just like radio, but I get to choose when to listen to it.
Yeah. And that was the thing I didn't get about podcasts at first. I was like, it's a radio show? I thought we're done with radio shows. And then I started to learn the benefits of it and how it fit into my lifestyle.
I gave you some suggestions, and those suggestions fit with the rest of the suggestions that we've given you throughout this episode.
Wow.
This has been a very long recording for us, but I do feel that we have done a very comprehensive job of pointing out the pros and cons, the effectiveness and ineffectiveness of all of these different methods of music discovery. Mike, I want to ask you, is there anything that you feel that we left out or things that you want to leave this episode with?
No, I feel like we could do individual topics on every single little thing here. So I don't want to hear you forgot to say blah, blah, blah. No, we know we didn't say blah, blah, blah. We either did it and we edited it out or, there's only so much we can cover in one podcast episode.
If anything, I just feel that these methods are going to evolve over time. And so this is going to be an evolving topic.
You want to talk about reckoning? YouTube has a reckoning coming soon. Who knows how that's going to change?
I think Spotify too, or streaming services in general.
Yeah.
These are things that are malleable still. They may have a lot of money behind them. They may have gone public, who knows, but they're not godly. So we will see what that reckoning looks like, certainly. Yeah. Having said that, have a wonderful 2018. We just want to thank you for listening to the show. Go check out our new website at lo-fidelity.info. And Mike, let's end off the episode.
All right. So that was our discussion regarding methods of music discovery. We are always interested in hearing what you have to say about the albums we review and the talks we have. So join the discussion on our subreddit or send us your take, feedback at lo-fidelity.info.
Next time on the show, we are going to analyze and review Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra. Until then, thank you for listening to Low Fidelity, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.